Hello and welcome to today's video. So in this one we are reviewing the Razer Blade 2020. So this is the base model which ships with the Nvidia GTX 1660 Ti. Now we recently picked this up in the Amazon Prime deals because it was going for such a good deal. So in the UK it was going for £800 and in the US I believe it was going for about $900 to $950. So to get this kind of package, it just seemed like an absolute no-brainer. We're not going to be going into the deep dive of benchmarks and getting really technical, just because with this channel we try to approach it as just the general consumer who's looking to get something and just that basic understanding of it. So let's get cracking with the video and go over some of the things that we really liked about this device and some of the things that we disliked about it as well. So the first thing that I absolutely adored about this device is just the build quality of it. It feels so incredibly solid and premium. The whole thing feels so incredibly well made, and out of the box I was really impressed with it. When it comes to the build quality as well, things like the keyboard and the trackpad, just the whole thing feels really well made and put together. As a MacBook user myself, I really like having a decent build quality, and this thing gets pretty damn close to the MacBook build standard, so I'm really impressed with it so far. If you're in the market for something that offers a lot in terms of gaming, but doesn't do it in an overly obtuse way like some gaming laptops do, then this could be the thing for you. The only thing that really stands out and screams gamer is this Razer logo on the top, and I do wish that this was kind of either a matte finish or just a black finish or even just a light that you could then disable. This will glow, you can disable it in the settings, but you know, it is this bright green Razer logo, so that's the only thing on there. Apart from that, it looks professional and could definitely fit with your normal workflow and then do some really decent gaming as well. So build quality is fantastic. The other thing that I really liked, and I didn't expect to like it that much, is the screen quality on this device. And the first thing that really stood out to me is the matte finish of the screen. Now again, coming from a MacBook, I have quite a glossy display, which means when I'm in somewhere like here, which has quite a lot of bright lights, there's just a lot of reflection on it. It can make it quite hard to see at times. With the Razer, it doesn't ever become a problem. It's got a really good matte finish, and it just stops a lot of those annoying reflections. Makes it absolutely fantastic in terms of gaming because you're not then having to make sure you're in a really dark room or anything like that. And that's good because this screen doesn't get particularly bright, and that's one of the things that we dislike about it. But the good thing is, because it is that matte non-reflective screen, you don't have to worry about it too much. Obviously the matte screen isn't where this thing shines. It's really down to that refresh rate. So it has a 120Hz refresh rate and things are buttery smooth. Even just in the user interface, it's just really nice kind of whizzing around. And as I use an iPad Pro 12.9 inch, I really like that refresh rate, but I haven't yet used it on a laptop or a computer, which is kind of crazy considering I absolutely adore gaming so much. But using it on this, it's just so incredibly smooth. And when it comes to gaming, which we'll come on to later in terms of some of the benchmarks of games we've played, it's just an absolute dream moving from that 60Hz display that I'm used to 120Hz on this device. Animations in terms of the operating system just look fantastic and everything just flows really nicely, and that 120Hz display just makes everything look so much better. Now this is only a 1080 panel, so at the end of the day, if you're expecting incredible pixel quality, you're not going to get it from this device. However, it looks good enough for pretty much everything that I was doing, and at no point did I ever look at it and think it's an ugly panel. It looks really good. Everything on there is sharp enough, the pixel quality looks good, and just the quality of the panel looks really good. In comparison to something like my MacBook Pro, the colors and everything popped and everything looked pretty accurate. Again, not going to go into a massive deep dive of that because we're probably not the ones to bring you that information, but everything on here looked fantastic. It was easy enough to do video editing on it, and everything just looked the way we'd expect it to look. So when it comes to the screen quality, the only complaint that we do have is the brightness. Just compared to most other devices that I've used, the brightness on this and the peak brightness, it's not good enough. It's pretty dim at most times, which is a bit disappointing. For the most part, it's not an issue, and that matte display does help things, but when you get into a really bright room, things do start to struggle. Not so much in the everyday use of it, but if you're doing some gaming, for example, I was playing Resident Evil 2 and there's a lot of dark scenes in that, it just becomes almost impossible to see some of those darker scenes. So just bear that in mind. If you're in a bright place all of the time, you might want to look for something that has a brighter panel. Whilst we're still on the topic of the build quality, let's talk about the keyboard and the trackpad. Now again, as somebody who is really picky about keyboards, doing a lot of typing every day, I've got to say this thing is really nice. There's a decent amount of travel and the keys feel pretty solid, and there's a good amount of spacing on it. I was able to type and use the keyboard really accurately and I never had any particular issues with it. The only one thing that I would say is the row of number keys at the top. I have no idea what savage chose to design this thing, but for whatever reason the number and the exclamation mark was swapped around. It's just a visual thing, but it's weird and it's kind of frustrating. Apart from that, things looked really good and it was easy enough to use. There's also RGB on this thing as well, so if you are a fan of RGB lighting, it's got it. Although it is just a single unit of RGB, it's not per key. So if you're wanting to kind of have a super rainbow, you're not going to get it on here, but you can switch up those colors if you want to. Moving on to the trackpad, and that is a hard thing to nail, especially from somebody who uses MacBooks all the time, because let's just face it, Apple make absolute killer trackpads. Now, this thing comes close to what I'd expect from a good trackpad from the likes of Apple, for example. It's big, it's solid, and it has gesture control as well, which, absolutely love that for being able to snap back and forth between applications and stuff like that. However, there's just something slightly off about it. For just general navigation and quick commands and stuff like that, the trackpad is really good. It's sensitive, it basically doesn't miss a beat, it's a really accurate trackpad, but for the really tiny little details where you're just slightly moving over, sometimes it just seems to stick or not quite respond the way I'd like it to, and you kind of have to do multiple drags. It's not the biggest deal in the world, and I certainly got used to it, and this trackpad is damned good for a Windows laptop, but it just had this frustrating little thing where you just... I did update all of the drivers, I updated all the Razer Synapse software as well, but it stuck with me and it decided that that little issue wasn't going to go away. It's not the biggest issue in the world, and if you've not used a Mac trackpad and you're not used to that level of just kind of really fine-tuning the trackpad itself, then you're probably not even going to notice it, and it's just really me nitpicking more than anything else. But it's there, and it's just something to bear in mind if you are somebody who is moving from something that's got an absolutely killer trackpad, then this might frustrate you a little bit, but you will get used to it. The other thing to mention is the ports on this thing, and it's got them, which is an absolute dream come true. Again, coming from a MacBook, which has 0 ports, apart from obviously USB Type-Cs and Thunderbolts, this thing has a lot of legacy ports on there. So you've got your HDMI on this side, you've got your full-size USB, you've got your USB Type-C. Again, on this side, you've got your barrel connector for charging, headphone jack, USB Type-C, and your USB Type-A on this side as well. Now, those USB Type-Cs can be used for Thunderbolt, so if you want to use something like an external GPU, you have that ability with this, which again just helps to future-proof the device. It also makes it just a little bit more flexible in terms of what you want to do. So, with this, for example, I would love to use this as, I guess, my go-to device, and then some light mobile gaming around the house. But then if I was going to do any serious gaming, I'd get an external GPU dock, and then when I go to use my gaming monitor and my gaming setup, could literally plug this in, use all the games installed on here, and just use that external GPU. It's just the best of both in my opinion, and I love that idea of using a Thunderbolt dock. One thing that I will say that's a massive disappointment in terms of these ports is you can only charge it through the barrel connector. For whatever reason, you can't use these USB Type-C for charging, which just seems kind of odd. Now, I get it from a certain perspective. They're going down the Microsoft route of not wanting to, I guess, have consumers plugging things in and then they start doing some gaming on it, but the USB Type-C isn't delivering enough charge, so the battery discharges while they use it. Which is a fair point, I suppose, but at the end of the day, let the consumers find that out themselves and learn from their mistakes. It's just nice to have an alternative way to charge. Just sometimes if you're doing some work and you want to top it up and you don't have that charger with you, and also as well, just in case anything happens to that charger, at least then you've got the flexibility to be able to charge it, because that thing is a beast. This is the charging brick. And it's not the biggest one in the world that I've seen, but it is pretty big. So ultimately you're having to carry this around along with your laptop when you're out and about, and you can't use the USB Type-C to keep it charged, which is just a bit of a pain. Now moving on to some of the performance side of things. So like we said at the beginning of this video, we wanted to approach this as, I guess, a value proposition for gaming. So something that delivers a premium package, but also offers some decent gaming performance as well when you're not using your main desktop PC. And I've got to say, this thing really does deliver surprisingly well, and it exceeds my expectations in a lot of ways. So I suppose we've got to bear in mind that this is a 1080 panel, so it's not going to be the most taxing thing when it comes to the GPU. However, this thing delivers some really, really good results, and I've had an absolute blast playing through some games on it. Not only do they look fantastic, but that 120Hz panel is just, it's absolutely beautiful, and I've had so much fun playing games on here. And I now absolutely need to upgrade my gaming monitor to something that's higher than 60Hz, because going back to that, it's going to kill me. So first up, I played through the Resident Evil 2 remake, and throughout that entire game on high settings I was getting over 100 frames per second. Now that is an older title, but it's not massively old, and the thing looks pretty damned gorgeous. Now I didn't get any dropped frames or anything like that, and performance was pretty consistent throughout the whole thing. So getting 100 frames per second on that, well, it just looked fantastic, played fantastic, and this thing really did a good job. Switching it up to something that was a little bit different, and one that some people from our audience requested that I do benchmarks for, was Total War Warhammer. Now this game is obviously very different to something like Resident Evil 2. You've got your open battlefields and everything like that, a lot of units and a lot of action going off on screen at the same time. Now I decided that I would go full hog when it came to the graphics, and when I set the thing to Ultra, I was getting between 40 and 50 frames per second in large scale combat. So that was pretty much all of my units in battle at the same time, zooming in, zooming back out, and it never really dropped below that. There are the occasional dips where it would drop down to about 35 frames per second, but for the most part it would stay above the 40 frames per second and averaged around about 50. When I wasn't in combat, I tended to get around about 70 frames per second. So at Ultra settings, this thing delivers really well when it comes to Total War Warhammer. Another game that we tested to get a slightly different perspective and go for a first-person shooter was Doom Eternal. Now we set this to Ultra settings, and when set at those settings we got 100 frames per second plus. Now it would normally jump up to about 110, 112 frames per second, but when I started to get into more open scenes with a lot of combat going on, that's when it would drop down to about 100 frames per second. Never really dipped, and occasionally it would dip to about 90 to 95 frames per second, but for the most part the game played at 100 frames per second throughout the whole thing. Fantastic experience on here, especially with that refresh rate, and it just looked absolutely beautiful. So all in all, the gaming performance of this thing is really, really solid, and it absolutely blew me away and exceeded what I expected it would deliver. So I'm really, really impressed with it. So there's a lot to like about this device, but there are definitely a few things that I disliked about it. They weren't deal breakers by any means, but we're certainly going to cover them off just so that you can make an informed decision if you are looking to buy something like this. So the first thing is the battery life of this. On gaming, we tended to get about an hour and a half to 2 hours of battery before we needed to plug it in. Now that's not necessarily unexpected, especially from a gaming laptop, but it is a bit disappointing. If you're away from the house or anything like that, you are going to need your charger with you. Again, you can't top it up with USB Type-C, which is a bit disappointing. And for general use, we've got between 5 and 6 hours of usage, which again isn't a deal breaker, it's almost a full day. But it does mean that if you're out and about and away from home and you do want to use this as a professional tool, then you are going to need that charger, which again is a big brick. I wish you could charge it with USB Type-C. The other thing to consider is the heat of this. So it does get hot. Now it doesn't get uncomfortably hot, but it's something to bear in mind. Now on the bottom you have your fans, and also you have this kind of grill where the airs can circulate back out through it. And it does a pretty decent job of maintaining decent temperatures and not overheating or crashing or anything like that. So I wouldn't worry too much about it, but it's certainly something to bear in mind. A lot of the time I found that the top of the keyboard deck would start to get warm if I was doing anything like gaming and I was using the keyboard and then had a mouse plugged into it. And after long periods of play, it would start to get a little bit uncomfortable. Not too much so that I couldn't play on it anymore, but it was definitely noticeable. And obviously when it comes to heat, you also have fan noise. And this has plenty of fan noise. And when I say plenty of fan noise, I mean plenty of fan noise. A lot of the time it sounded like it was going to take off. Now, I will say that despite it getting loud in terms of the fans, it wasn't obnoxious. Like, sometimes you have fans that go and they have kind of like a high-pitched, annoying whir. This kind of felt more of a, I don't know, it's really hard to describe, and we'll try and capture some of it when we've got some of the gaming going. The other thing to bear in mind is that although the fans do get loud, they don't overpower the speakers on this. So this thing has a decent set of top-firing speakers. So even when the fans are kind of going at their craziest, and they do get a bit crazy, the speakers absolutely drown them out, and it doesn't get too loud to enjoy the speakers on this thing. So that's one positive. However, for gaming, that's kind of fine, but for everyday use, if you're using it in the office, if you're using it in somewhere that's going to be relatively quiet, the fans do spin up quite a lot, even if you're doing something that's not necessarily taxing the device, and they can get pretty loud for almost no reason. So if you are somewhere that's quiet and you've got colleagues or people that you don't want to kill you because your device is loud, just bear that in mind, because they might take your charging brick and beat you to death with it. Remember, it's a big charging brick and you have to take it places. This gets loud, so Yeah, just consider that. There's no Windows Hello, so for some reason when I unboxed this, I thought that power button was also going to be a fingerprint reader. It's not, and it doesn't have any infrared or anything like that to scan your face, so you are stuck to typing in your password. Again, not the end of the world, but it is something to consider if you do like those nifty little security features, just not with this one. And probably the last thing to talk about is the webcam and the internal microphones on this. You're probably going to want an external webcam and a decent external microphone if you're doing a lot of, I guess, Zoom conference calls or anything like that. Now, we're going to have a clip next for you just to see, so that way you can see what that webcam quality looks like yourself and what the microphones sound like, but they're not great. It's relatively hollow in terms of that microphone. It sounds pretty tinny, and the webcam quality is just, well, let's see for yourself. Okay, so this is the quality of the webcam and the quality of the internal microphones as well. I kind of waved to give you a bit of an idea of motion blur and stuff like that. So overall, the quality of the image isn't too bad. It kind of captures a decent amount. So you're definitely picking up a lot of my grey hairs there, which is lovely. Colours are a bit odd, so I look as though I've got a lot of fake tan on, which is definitely different, and my beard looks a lot more ginger than it actually is. My beard is a lot more grey than what this is picking up. Be interesting to hear back what the actual audio sounds like, so I guess I shall go off and find out that now. So yeah, that's the microphone and that's the webcam. It's not the worst I've seen, but it's definitely not the best. So if you are somebody who needs a webcam a lot and you need decent microphones, then this probably isn't going to be for you. However, if you do need those things, then chances are you're also going to have those as external webcams, external microphones, because we're all doing things via teleconference these days. So that's pretty much it when it comes to the things that we liked and disliked about this device. And to sum up, it's an absolutely killer device. I've had so much more fun with this, and it's definitely exceeded my expectations, especially at that lower price point. At £800 or $950, it is an absolute steal. And in my opinion, you're not going to find anything better on the market. Yes, you might find things that are a little bit cheaper, but not in this form factor that looks and feels premium. So at the end of the day, it's an absolute steal if you can get it for that price. However, things start to fall apart when it comes to the actual asking price. So we got it in the Prime Day sale, and I would imagine it'll go onto a sale again in the Black Friday sales as well, so it's worthwhile keeping your eyes out for it, or just keeping your eyes out for any further sales of this dropping down. But at the £1,249 mark, it becomes a much bigger asking price, and I'm not entirely sure if it's worth that price, especially when for an extra £200 you can get the RTX 3060 and 144Hz display instead. So there's not too much of a jump up in price to that next tier. This becomes a bit of an odd stepping stone at £1,249 because it's not too far to a much better device, and it's definitely not budget. So although it is an absolute killer device and we think it's fantastic at that £800 price point. At that point, it offers so much value for money. It offers fantastic performance and just a fantastic build quality. But at the £1,249, because it's not too far to jump up to the next level, and even if that is your top budget, you'll be able to find something that offers better performance and much better value for money. So in summary, at £1,249, would say give it a miss. However, it's definitely worthwhile keeping your eyes out for the sales because they do drop down quite often. So if you are in the market for something like this, and if it does come back up again for like the £800 mark, then absolutely pick one of these up because it is a fantastic machine at that price. So as always, we really hope this video has helped you, and if it has, then make sure you hit that like and subscribe button so you can come along for some more awesome content in the future. If you've got any questions at all, throw them down in the comments, and we'll do our best to answer those going forward. Like we said, this thing has really blown us away. At that £800 price point, it is fantastic value for money. £1,249, not so much, and it definitely becomes a harder pill to swallow, but for the price that we paid, and for anybody else out there who got it at that price, it's an absolute bargain, and you've gotten yourselves a steal. So that's it for today. In the meantime, stay safe, and we'll see you soon. Bye.